Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. I'm recording this here in my office where I work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and facilitator, and I'm excited to bring you a new episode because I truly believe in the power of conversations to change lives. Please check out the show notes for each episode to learn more about the topics covered and our guests, and check out the affiliate links of all our sponsors. That is a wonderful way to support this podcast, as well as visiting our Patreon page to support the podcast directly. I want to share with you about kanna. Kanna is an amazing herb from South Africa. The scientific name is Silentium tortuosum, and it's been used for centuries to support mood, emotional openness, and connection. I've been working with a company called Ka and Pathogenics here in Boulder, and I have an affiliate link below so you can order it and support the podcast. And I just want to share a little bit more about it. There's been some amazing scientific studies showing that people taking kanna actually score higher in compassion and empathy and openness, and it's a mood uplifter. It helps you feel better, almost like drinking a strong cup of dark chocolate cacao might be something similar, but it's different than that. It has its own unique feeling. One cautionary note is it's not recommended if you're taking SSRIs or other drugs that act on your serotogenic system, and you should talk to your healthcare provider. So this isn't healthcare advice or medical advice, but kanna is legal and it is powerful and potent, and it can be a helpful ally in your path. So if you're interested in exploring it more, check out the link below, and I look forward to seeing you there. Another way you can support this podcast and improve your overall health and wellness is through Shilajit. Shilajit is a traditional mineral-rich resin. It's been used for thousands of years in the Himalayas, and it's really incredible. I have access to really high-quality Shilajit that's been tested and made sure that it doesn't have any harmful additives, nothing like that. It's from the Ural Mountains of Russia, and you can message me at the link below in the podcast show notes if you're interested. And I'll just share a little bit about Shilajit. It's actually formed from ancient plant matter that's been compressed over centuries. It's very high in fulvic acid and trace minerals. It helps support mitochondrial function, energy production, and nutrient absorption. And a lot of people today are using it for vitality, endurance, cognitive clarity, overall resilience. It can taste a little gnarly, but I like to drink it in the morning with warm water, which is a traditional way to take it. And if you haven't tried it out, try it out. It's definitely been a game changer for me, and I think it's a great way to start off your day. Another way you can support this podcast as well as your health and wellness is to check out the blue light blocking glasses from EMR Tech. There's an affiliate link below in the show notes, and they're making really high quality glasses that I think are also pretty fashionable. There's different glasses for during the day, for during the sunset, or for during the evening. And I think this is a simple thing that we could all start doing more that can really improve your health. It'll improve your sleep at night if you wear them during the day and at night. There's research showing that blue light suppresses melatonin. It disrupts our circadian rhythm, negatively impacting our sleep quality, our recovery, and our nervous system regulation. And so as more and more of us are spending more time on screens, having things like good blue light blocking glasses that you actually like to wear, I think can be really helpful. So check it out below. Let me know if you have any questions. So we're here today with Ramzey Abueita. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. It's so great to have you on the podcast finally. We've been talking about it probably since we met like 5 years ago. So
Yeah. It feels so good to finally be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on. And I think of you as a community super connector, really connected with people, done a lot of great things for the community. How would you introduce yourself to people?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I wear a lot of hats. I think of myself definitely as a community-oriented person, but also one of the identities that I like to carry is as a freedom fighter. Basically, I spent many years of my life advocating for the liberation of psychedelics for community use. And that's probably one of the things that I'd be most happy to have on my tombstone whenever I die is, as someone who helped liberate medicines for the people. So that's probably one of my great identities that I bear on my heart is a psychedelic freedom fighter.
I love that.
Yeah. And on top of that, being a community organizer, connector, a weaver is something that brings me immense joy and gratification. So that's also something that I really take to heart.
Yeah. I think that's, a big part of how we connected originally. was around psychedelics and around the decriminalization movement here in Colorado. I know you were a big part of that. And there's this beautiful connection between what you just said, liberation, freedom, cognitive liberty to be able to choose psychedelics at the right time and place for yourself, and also community and connection. And so I got to talk with one of the founders of the IPI. It's like the foremost training institute for psychedelic therapy here in Colorado. And I asked him about this connection between psychedelics and community. And what he said really stuck with me, that there's a wound in our culture around connection, that our culture's become fragmented, and that so many people feel isolated. They feel, basically we're like hyper individualized, and we feel cut off from one another. And for myself and so many people I work with, part of the healing is getting more in touch with yourself, more connected with yourself, and also more connected with others, and creating more community. And that we live in a culture where, for many of us, we're not born into strong communities, but we need to create them. And that takes work and effort. And I hope for our children and for future generations, we are creating more of a community-oriented space. And I think psychedelics have a connection with that in an interesting way. A lot of people have had experiences, for example, like me and you have both gone to festivals, where a lot of people will have like their first experience with a psychedelic, or a lot of the art and music is inspired by psychedelics. Even if you choose not to take them there, it has that kind of flavor and inspiration, and it's also bringing people together. And a lot of people, out of their journeys and their healing journeys and their transformations with psychedelic medicines, or just through the inner work, through connecting with spirit, are discovering that sense of connection. So that's something, I appreciate about you, and it makes sense. And when we think about mushrooms as an organism, they are super connected, right? They're under the ground in all these mysterious ways and popping up all over the place. And
Yeah, I think there are so many different ways to apply psychedelic metaphors to greater contexts. And the amount of examples that there are is immense. But one thing that I'll just start with is I agree with you that most of our society has gotten to be very fragmented and compartmentalized. And the American culture is plagued with a situation that a lot of people are facing, an epidemic of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
I like to harken back to what I call village vibes. I think that the human species evolved from a biological and earth milieu where we were in such closer proximity to each other. We emerged from social contexts where we were in constant contact with so many people, and even into the early, village and town and, community type situations, probably from the advent of the agricultural revolution, from when humans first started settling in cities. You would see the same people all the time, and children would run freely in the streets. And there are some regions around the world where this is still the dynamic, where the villages are very tight knit. People live in close proximity to each other. Everybody knows the local craftsmen and workers and bakers and smiths and all these different roles. Who the local mailman is, who the people are. And the American culture, the American society has gotten to be so fragmented because of the automobile and the vast distances between people's homes and works and suburbia. And, people live in a type of dynamic where you go home, you get out of your car into the garage, straight into the home. You wake up in the morning, you go straight into the car, out of the garage, straight to work. And that's part of the reason why the term third spaces has come to be, because a place that's not your home or work, because we've gotten to be so fragmented. And if you're either at home or your work, and if you're at somewhere else, that's a third space. I think some cultures, the idea of a third space is a completely moot concept, because people are not basically stuck at home or at work, but we are. And I think that it behooves our society to take efforts into finding a new paradigm, finding a new way for us to spend more time in community, more time out and about, where we have more surface area, where we come in contact with other people and we're able to create relationships and have a community that feels like what I last remember experiencing when I was in high school. Seeing the same people all the time and knowing their stories, knowing all the tea and everything. And I think that a lot of society is thirsty for that, for something like that, to bring back a sense of community, so people feel less fragmented and isolated in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, and I think we're doing that, and more and more people are waking up to that and creating it. But there's a piece around choosing that and valuing it. And it's gotten even worse, with, of course, with especially with COVID and all the remote work. I mean, there's an interesting polarity between personal individual freedom and that sense of connection, where so many of our ancestors like lived and died in the same, maybe 10 square miles or whatever it was. And now we can move all around, like you said, and we can go all around the world. And yet that quality of like being seen, witnessed, known throughout your life in a community, it's not something that we can't take that for granted. So,
yeah. I think on that note, it makes me think of what some people have called the democratization of information. The other day, I was having a conversation with a friend when we were thinking about music. I think back 10, 20 years ago, the selection of music that people had was so vast, or was so limited, actually.
Right. It's a lot less out there.
Yeah. Most of the music that people had access to was kind of restricted to what the mainstream wanted you to listen to. The radio waves, basically all the music that everybody knew was all the stuff that you heard on the radio and the stuff that you found on CDs at the record store. Today, the access to music has gotten to be so enormous and niche, aside from people that are still kind of plugged into what I would call the mainstream general scene. If you find anybody who kind of has their own, idiosyncratic taste in music, it's highly unlikely that any two people are going to have like the same exact, top 5 artists of music. So I just find that so fascinating, that the access to so much of a variety of music has kind of created what I would call almost silos, such a hyper individualized niche of music, which on the one hand is dope. That's awesome. Whatever like really specific idiosyncratic preference a person has for genre and taste and music, the person can really explore that and dive deep into it. On the other hand, in previous eras, like 10, 20, 30 years ago, music was almost a monoculture. You had like your basket of genres, like rock, rap, pop, whatever.
Like R&B, country, that's about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Classical.
Exactly. Yeah. And you had those genres, and you had sort of like a bit of a selection within those genres. But outside of that, music was such a monoculture. You could walk down the street and you could just assume that everybody knew the same music. So, we in a sense have lost that broad, sensation of rapport and, immediate understanding of culture that other people share, that people would share on a broad level. But at the same time, we've also gained, the ability to indulge in very specific amplified exemplars of what a person's like actual taste is. And then on the other hand, I will just mention that one thing that we have gotten away from is the gatekeeping, the corporate gatekeeping that kind of dictated, what kind of music was able to make it to the airwaves. Because back in the day, to actually be a famous mainstream musician, you had to go through so much corporate gatekeeping. The record labels and the industry, the music industry, basically held the keys and really dictated who it was that was going to make the radio and be able to receive the funding and the resources to produce music videos and to get the team to go on tour and all that. And today, that's also become very democratized, where a musical act, it doesn't take a huge threshold to be able to garner enough resources to get out there and go on tour and produce music videos.
That's right.
So we lost the monoculture, we lost like the broader cultural rapport, but at the same time we gained so much. We were able to kind of like take the keys away from the insular and selective musical industrial complex. And now we've sort of been able to give people more access to what they really like. So you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, there's pros and cons. Music is a great example, and there's so many other examples: TV, movies, the news. So like just the overall information has become so siloed. And I mean, with music, for example, you're right. Like the corporate gatekeeping, like they could kind of create a star. Maybe it was like, their wife's sister's cousin, or like they would make them a star right there. And now it's, democratized. Like it's so much more affordable to get the equipment to make your music and to put it up on the internet. And there's so much more of it. Like if you looked at a graph of all the music released year by year, it just shoots straight up. It's just like so much music out there now. It's overwhelming. And now with AI, we're going to be flooded with music and video clips and writing, and it's like the amount that's being created is so much, it's hard to rise above the noise. And it takes away, like you're saying, from that shared cultural experience where everyone comes together. We still have it occasionally, like there's things like the Super Bowl or whatever. But even with that, like people's, look at the Super Bowl halftime show. There's so many different perspectives. Some people loved it, some people hated it. All the different political ideologies, like they have their little take on it. Like the MAGA people made their own halftime show this year. So even that, we're losing, it's hard to find something that brings us all together. And so like the fragmentation is just getting more and more intense. And there are good things about it, and you can choose, but it does have that siloing effect. And I have this value of talking to all kinds of different people and listening to different perspectives. And the danger of that I found is, because I tend to be so open-minded, the danger of that is you start getting lost and confused and like, I don't even know what's true anymore because I just read 5 different articles on the same event or topic, and they're like from different universes. And I think ultimately it shows how the universe that you live in, the world that you live in, is created by your mind, and it's informed by the information you take in, just like your body is made by the food you eat. And we're living in different universes that are less connected, less shared points of reference. And there's something beautiful about it and something unsettling and ungrounded about it. So yeah, it's the world we're in.
Yeah, I think that with the advent of the internet and all of these hyper individualized information contexts that people can have access to, I think that humanity is ready for a reckoning. I think that there comes a point where people just have to come to the realization that, hey, I could, spend so many hours of the day on this screen getting absorbed in this hyper individualized algorithm driven feed that is basically engineered by some of the most sophisticated algorithms and AIs and digital intelligences ever designed to capture attention. And at that point, it becomes the fact that these platforms are delivering all this information, not because it's actually generating any intrinsic value, but because your attention is what they're harvesting. They're harvesting attention so they could serve you ads, and they're selling your attention to the advertisers. And the information is engineered to be as addicting as possible. And I think that as a species, as a people, we can enjoy, the fruits of this to a degree, really niche, phenomenal educational content, and really, fine-tuned musical selections and all these really things, like exquisitely curated content that really, scratches every itch that you dream of. But at the same time, these platforms want you to get absorbed and locked into it and lost at the expense of our connection with the rest of the world. And that's why I think that there must be some sort of impulse to suck people out of, digital entrainment and, back into the real world. And I think that part of the reason why there is this loneliness epidemic is because a lot of people are stuck in the rut. They're stuck in a digital rut. They're addicted to screens.
Mm-hmm.
And for the one point, I can't blame people. I can't blame people for being addicted to screens and scrolling and doom scrolling and reels and TikTok and all these, you know, short form videos that are engineered to capture your attention and kind of be like the candy of attention. And when
Mm-hmm.
people are, you know, stuck in absence of more gratifying, more nourishing stimulus, you know, in their environment, they just get sucked into the runaway feedback loop of doom scrolling and consuming
Yeah.
TikToks and
Yeah. Yeah.
reels and all that content, and they get stuck in a rut. And thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
if we are to, you know, turn this back to the topic of psychedelics, I think
Mm-hmm.
that the idea of pulling oneself out of a rut is actually at the core of how the psychedelic experience is a powerful catalyst for transformation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. We need to look at information the way we look at food. We know that eating McDonald's every day and Doritos and soda is terrible for you. And it's the same thing with the information we're taking in. It's the exact same thing. And we need to use our intelligence and slow down, zoom out, and check in. What do I want to be creating in myself? What kind of mind do I want to be creating? Because, you know, what you feed is what we create. What we put our attention on is what we give our energy to. And to make that conscious and have good choices there. And yeah, I love that potential with psychedelics. It's not just a potential. Many people have experienced that. When you, again, you need to use them in the right way, in the right context, with good intentions, and be intelligent about it and be wise. And if you can get support and help, and it's, you know, and then like use it to deprogram yourself and find your own liberty and freedom and your own intelligence and choice and wisdom. And I'm recommending to people to do a kind of media fast, like a week or so before a psychedelic experience, if you can, at least 3 days, at least the day before, for sure. Avoid violent movies, avoid the news, avoid the social media scrolling for 48 hours or more, however much you can, but a week, really, like take it seriously. And you're freeing up space in your mind, and you're able to think your own thoughts finally, and you're able to connect more deeply with yourself. So yeah, I love that, like that connection with liberation and psychedelics. I feel like that's important to share. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we've been witnessing what some people might have called a renaissance, but I don't even think it's a renaissance because renaissance implies kind of like a revitalization. I think broadly there's a revitalization, but specifically if we're going to talk about the neuroscience of psychedelics, it's not a renaissance, it's a complete revolution. Because prior to the last 10 years, the research on psychedelics was rather limited. But over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen so much research go into psychedelics. People have been going into the fMRI scanners and EEG machines, and there's been so much data gathered about what happens to people's brain and nervous system when they're under the influence of psychedelics. And there have been lots of phenomenal conceptual frameworks and theories put out about the mechanism of psychedelics. You know, prior to this neuroscience revolution, a lot of the what's the word I'm looking for here? A lot of the conceptualization or, you know, extrapolation or explanation of what's happening when people are under the influence of a psychedelic have been sort of, you know, intellectual, introspective frameworks. For example, Aldous Huxley, his famous The Doors of Perception, he posited that when people would take a psychedelic substance, it would open up the valve in their mind and give them access to the mind at large. And he posited that the mind is actually a reduction valve, because it's actually reducing the amount of information that you can absorb from the environment. And the influence of a psychedelic basically opens up that valve and allows more information to flood into you.
That's so interesting. There's truth in that, right? It's experientially. Like you could, all of a sudden you could spend an hour looking at a patch of grass, you know, during a psychedelic journey, or with your eyes closed, listening to one piece of music, like being totally absorbed in that and taking in so much more information than you would in your normal state of consciousness. Yeah. Maybe you know, I love, and I'm a huge fan of meditation. I'm just getting back from this week-long meditation retreat with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he shared so much neuroscience around meditation, and can even put up brain scans of people in deep meditation and people with psilocybin assisted therapy, and how similar they were, if not the same. And so I'm becoming more and more a proponent of really learn meditation, practice it, have a psychedelic experience if you're called to that. It's not for everyone, and there are risks and there are side effects, and have practices that help you continue that opening and deepening process in your path without the medicine. And that's just true to me. So that's what I believe in. That's what I want to share.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely so many convergences with the psychedelic state and the deep meditative state, especially states of consciousness that are accessible to really experienced meditators.
Mm-hmm.
And they have done
advanced meditators.
Yeah, and they've done some studies with really advanced meditators, and they've compared the brain scans of advanced meditators with those who are actively experiencing ego dissolution under a psychedelic, and they find that there are actually some parallels and similarities in the signal. And one of those parallels is actually one of the big buzzwords that pops up every time you talk about the neuroscience of psychedelics, which is the default mode network.
Yes. Yeah.
And back 10 years ago, nobody knew what the default mode network was, except for people, neuroscientists who are studying attentional systems and all that. But nowadays, it's basically become common knowledge. You can walk down the street and find like soccer moms who are talking about the default mode network.
Maybe here in Boulder.
Because they read about it in a Michael Pollan book.
Yeah, that's a huge advancement. I love that that's becoming more known and talked about and studied, and they can actually see the neural pathways of that, like the scans of that showing that. I mean, I think that's a huge advancement in our understanding. And it shows, so one of the things psychedelics do, right, is make the mind less rigid, more open, more connected, less in the normal pathways. And that's like so powerful, I think, especially for older people. Like we get stuck in the ruts, like you said, in the grooves. And when you're really stuck and rigid, that's a good definition of what depression is. Depression is a rigid mind. It's stuck. There's not a lot of energy. Things seem the same every day. The future seems hopeless because you're in this depressed state. Like that's part of the definition of that. And so if you can have a psychedelic therapy or ceremony or however you get there, if you can have some kind of experience, it could be through breath work. There's many other ways too. Meditation. Meditation takes work. But anyway, if you can have an experience where the clouds part and you're not in that rut and you're seeing things in a new way, even if it's confusing and chaotic, you've proven to yourself that that's not how the world is all the time. And there's hope. And then you can follow that rabbit hole. You can follow that thread and you can get to a new place. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite neuroscience researchers is Dr. Robin Carhart Harris. And he has published some of the most seminal work regarding theories and frameworks about how psychedelics influence the mind from a neuroscientific angle. And earlier we were talking about Aldous Huxley and his idea of the mind at large, and how the mind is a reducing valve, and that being under the influence of a psychedelic opens up the valve and gives you access to the mind at large. And I find that a lot of Dr. Robin Carhart Harris's research actually converges with some of those prior
That's
theories.
amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And he created a theory called the entropic brain hypothesis. And he originally published this, I believe it might have been in 2014 or 2016, one of those 2 years. We can fact check that later. But it's barely been 10 years. And the ripples from what he published in that paper still hold true. And one of the ideas that I originally read in that paper is this notion that when people are under the influence of a psychedelic substance, it turns off signals, or it turns off the strength of activity from the default mode network. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, the default mode network is what's active when a person is idle. So different brain networks are active when you're doing different things. For example, when you are performing an intentionally or an attentionally intensive task, like you're doing math equations in your head, or you're really trying to strategize something, or you're doing something that really involves your focused attention. You have certain brain networks that are active, like your attentional network, your salience network. Now, typically there is an inverse correlation. So whenever you're attentional network is active, your default mode network is unactive. So sometimes people have an overactive default mode network. And just to offer a little bit more context to the default mode network, imagine here, let me ask you, what typically goes through your mind when you're sitting idle? You actually might not be the best person to ask, because I reckon you probably have years of being an experienced meditator and have probably cultivated some contemplative practices, and may have a little bit of mental hygiene that perhaps the general population might not have. But
but I could say, like, if I'm just sitting there, I do have that awareness I've cultivated and that ability to be mindful, but it does take remembering that, reminding myself, and so I can see like where the mind will go. And for me, it'll often go to politics or a YouTube video I just saw, or to this podcast, and I'll be like imagining like this conversation with you and getting some viral clip or something like that.
Right. So you're reliving like past conversations with people, and you're imagining things involving your broader social context. So the default mode network is really heavily involved in autobiographical thought.
So that's a positive answer I just gave. And then if I'm more vulnerable, it depends how I'm feeling. If I'm having a down moment or a down day, it tends to be self-referential. It's about myself. I'm remembering something I did or said or something I missed out on. That comes up for me a lot. It's kind of a neurotic quality in my mind. I'm like, oh, that person's birthday party, or this event, or I think the default mode network for a lot of us, if we're honest, tends to be thinking about ourselves, be thinking about the past and something negative. And I'm the same, I can relate to that 100%. So,
yeah. So mental time travel
and
autobiographical thought. So
you're out of the present moment.
Exactly. Yeah. You're out of the present moment. You're thinking about yourself, and you're thinking about yourself in relation to social contexts. For a lot of people who suffer through depression, for example, this module is overactive. So they're constantly reliving embarrassing moments. Like that one time when they were in 5th grade and they farted loudly in class and everybody laughed at them, and their crush never looked at them the same. Oh, man.
I've got a 5th grade story of, I won an essay writing contest for the DARE program. This is funny. The Just Say No to Drugs. It was in our elementary school. This police officer came and essay writing contest. I wrote this essay. I had to go. Went in front of the whole elementary school and read this thing out loud. And like, it was like that time when my voice was kind of changing, and it was like the worst, most awkward public speaking experience ever. And so that one has stayed with me. And it's kind of related to what we're talking about, because that Just Say No to Drugs, but that was also like really uncool. But the essay I wrote was like totally for that, because that was what I thought I was supposed to write.
Yeah, we're reliving embarrassing moments. And this is the thing about the default mode network, because as a social species, it behooves us to have a self-reflective understanding of where we are in the pecking order as a species.
The hierarchy.
Yes. Peterson calls it the social hierarchy.
Yep.
And a lot of us are constantly aware of where we are in the social hierarchy, and
or where we think we are.
Yeah. Because, we evolved as apes in the African savannah. You look at chimpanzees and bonobos, and they're all hyper attuned to where they are in the dominance hierarchy, and and who they ought to be dominant to and who they ought to be submissive to. So there's sort of like a neurological impulse within our nervous system to keep tabs on the things that provoked humiliation, the things that provoked elation and social dominance and status and all these things. And this is one of the responsibilities of the default mode network. So when you're not busy, chopping wood or building a fire or doing things that involve your active attention, your mind's background process is to kind of like go through the script, run through some of the old memories, and kind of like work through the process of, counting the tabs and being like, oh, this thing caused humiliation. This thing caused me to be proud and have status. And this is just part of the routine of the default mode network. And when this process goes awry, this is what causes depression, anxiety, OCD, all these things.
Yep. Another painful example of that is the tendency to fixate and think about where someone insulted you, or, somehow you were wronged, or, the mind will just like, that can stay with you for decades, some incident where someone said something rude to you, whatever. But would you agree that the default mode network is basically the sense of self, or what some people call the ego in the relative sense?
Exactly.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
This is where the ego lives.
Yep.
The ego lives in the default mode network. And a lot of times this ego is a composite of all of these really micro remembered processes. Some of these things that the ego remembers are so minor and so like insignificant to people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like some of these like embarrassing memories, like nobody else cares or remembers.
No one else might remember it.
Yeah. But the ego is so like fixated on and obsessed. And there's this really wonderful quote, which I'll get to in a second, but so much of our like ego concept is derived from how we perceive others perceive us.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily an objective reading of like what this organism is embodying in the universe in this time and place, but rather this like hatchet job of like haphazardly put together memories like of things that have emotional salience,
Yep.
like embarrassing things, humiliations, proud things. You know, you can just run away with it. And yeah, you know, it's like it's this sensation of ego.
It's so true what you're sharing. Thank you for saying that so eloquently. And if you do go on like a meditation retreat, like I've done in my life, and you're sitting there with yourself for long periods of time, you get to know that so well, and it's so painful, and hopefully it becomes boring and you're able to pierce through the veil more and more. But man, it just keeps going. It's like there's like a best hits on loop of like, oh, that time in 5th grade, oh, that time that person, you know, didn't invite me, or that time that person, you know, said this comment about the way my shoes looked, and it's just like never ends. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, if you were to rewind like all of your memories, you know, it'll be such a very like mundane and boring, like recounting of what you've experienced. But the default mode network highlights these things of heightened salience, of heightened emotional signal. And just to, you know, circle back, you know, to sometimes when this module is overactive, you know, when people are in their heads, you know, they're stuck in their heads, they're stuck, you know, recounting these embarrassing memories and these like humiliating moments, and it kind of just like blows up in significance, and they kind of blow it up out of proportion, and this might cause a really negative self-image that people have, and low self-esteem if this module is overactive.
Absolutely.
And the thing is, it's actually it's a self-feeding feedback loop, because the more that a person sits and dwells upon and ruminates upon these negative memories of self-image, the more they are to sink into that rut and then keep dwelling upon these negative memories.
So important. Such an important point. So there's a huge potential mistake with meditation. If you're meditating, you know, that's great. We all know how, you know, I've heard so much about how great that is. We talk about it for hours. But if you're attempting to meditate and you are just ruminating in that default mode network, that's not real meditation. You've got to watch out for that.
Yeah. And then I'll appeal to another metaphor that I learned from Dr. Robin Carhart Harris. And he likes to bring up the imagery of a ski slope.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard him talk about that.
Yeah, it's my favorite metaphor regarding the default mode network, and also how psychedelics interface with it, which is every time you have a particular thought or behavior or pattern, imagine it's like you're at the top of like a big snowy hill, and you have these little skis, and then you go down the slope. And when you go down the slope with your skis kind of like dig a groove into the pile of snow. And then when you repeat that thought or behavior, it's like you go down that same little slope on the skis, and then you dig more into that groove in the snow. And then, so, you know, you're in the landscape of your mind, you have all these different grooves where, you know, you have gone down with your mental processes and habits. Now imagine after you've repeated a certain thought process or habit so many times, that groove gets so deep. It's so deep. And this is the ruts that we're talking about. And there comes a point where it gets so deep that imagine you're at the top of the hill and a gentle breeze blows you down. And then where are you going to go? You're going to slide right into that groove that's already carved really deep.
Mm.
So this is why it's so hard for some people to get out of these ruts, is
Yep.
because these grooves have gotten to be so deep
Yeah.
in their mind that it's like kind of like an automatic process that they wake up, they start ruminating, they start going down these self-destructive habits. And there could be a whole repertoire of, you know, behaviors and habits and thoughts and patterns that are so like deeply seated and ingrained into a person's habitual framework that it's sometimes impossible for them to see another way out. And Dr. Carhart Harris says that the psychedelic experience is like there being a big snowfall that comes in and then covers up all these grooves in the snow, and kind of gives like a fresh, you know, blanket of snow to enable a person to kind of choose new paths to go down on the skis instead of falling into those same patterns and routines.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, the experience itself could be confusing or even chaotic, or it might be difficult, or it might not make sense. But that can be good. It's like this, I like another metaphor of like a snow globe getting shaken up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the snow can fall in new places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's the whole process of shaking it up. And this also harkens back to why he calls it the entropic brain hypothesis, because as you were mentioning earlier, there are some contact points with, you know, disorders like depression and anxiety and OCD, and other conditions that are marked by what I would call like a rigidity. So people who suffer from depression, their depressive state and anhedonia and the rumination, all these things are very rigid. These are rigid patterns that doesn't have a lot of flexibility. Similarly, someone who has anxiety is always worrying and having basically mental time travel of the future. That has a negative valence, and this pattern of behavior is it's rigid. You know, it's very difficult for them to pull themselves out of that anxiety, because it's a rigid mental pattern. Similarly, people with OCD, these compulsions to do certain things, like to check that the door's locked 6 times, or
that's so tough.
Or having to like wash their hands like so many times a day, and all these like compulsive behaviors, these are rigid, you know. So there's this common thread between like anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, even the flashbacks that are triggered by negative stimuli that are reminiscent of a prior negative stimulus. These things are rigid, you know. It's if a person with PTSD has a flashback that's caused by a trigger, by a certain cue, their reaction to that stimulus is rigid. So rigidity is the common thread, and psychedelics, according to Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, basically put the brain and the nervous system in an entropic state that basically induces entropy. So entropy, for a lay audience, is basically the opposite of order. So this hyper rigidity that we're talking about is very ordered. It's very predictable. So the nervous system has these routines. It has the comfort of its own routines, and this comfort is very predictable. It's very ordered. And then entropy is basically the inverse of that order. So instead of the brain having this predictable pathway to go through, it's now in a state of entropy, where there's more disorder, there's more chaos, there's more, it's like the snow globe, you know, like you shake the snow globe, and instead of the snow being in this hyper ordered state, you know, at the bottom of the snow globe, now the snow is all up in the air, in a state of entropy. And he has also suggested that this state of entropy is very similar to states of consciousness that are also marked by the opposite of rigidity. And for example, one of them is the dream state of consciousness. When you're dreaming, you're in a state of entropy. When you are young and an infant, before you've created all of these concepts that have been sculpting your mind over the course of, you know, your life, your mind was in a more entropic state, where there was less order and more disorder, more just like being just raw immersion in the environment. There's so many different parallels that you could draw when you're kind of looking at this framework of, am I in a state of consciousness that's marked by entropy, or am I in a state of consciousness that's marked by rigidity and order? And I think that's a really profound insight from the research.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm noticing myself a little bit of resistance to the word entropy and disorder. I guess what I am thinking is ideally we get to states of higher and higher order that are more coherent, more ordered, more flexible, more open, more fluid, more adaptable to change, can see things from more perspectives or deeper perspectives, but not chaotic or not random. And an interesting correlate to that is there's a paper that MIT recently came out with that Dr. Joe Dispenza shared with us that showed that the electrons around the nucleus of an atom that they were able to measure were not popping in and out of existence randomly, which has been the mainstream view of quantum mechanics since the beginning, like that quantum mechanics and these particles are random. And he was saying they're not random. And I know he said he knows that from his own experience, but he showed this paper and it showed the patterns. And we looked at different like fractal imagery and the way nature organizes in these spiral patterns, often like galaxies or a pine cone or even the waves, in the ocean. There's an incredible amount of variability and there's an incredible amount of beauty, but there's an order to it. And that's like deeper universal order that I think true mysticism, spirituality can open us up to.
Yeah. I think we're getting at a really profound metaphysical conundrum here, because I think part of the human psyche, we have like this instinctual fear of the unknown, this instinctual fear of chaos, and our mind seeks order, our mind seeks predictability and stability and all these things, but I think Douglas Hofstadter has a beautiful quote where he says that sometimes you just get you dissolve yourself into the chaos, and I'm paraphrasing here. You dissolve yourself into the chaos, into the disorder, and then you find that there is a hidden order in the disorder.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is kind of like a cosmic archetype, and I think there are ways that we can find consilience between like the mystical, the spiritual, and the science. And one of the ways that we can basically unite, like the Aldous Huxley framework of psychedelics and the like Robin Carhart Harris theory of psychedelics, is by just beholding, this symmetry, this harmony, this consonance between, the insights that they have both had. And I think that one of the most profound aspects of the psychedelic experience is they create consonance between inner space and outer space. I think that as we grow up, we emerge into this world, as infants who our minds are just so wide open. We're sponges. We're just absorbing. We're just basically purely immersed into the world. And as Aldous Huxley would say, that's so much information for our nervous system to be able to process. And it doesn't make sense, to be an organism absorbing every single little bit of stimulus that emerges from the world, like every little leaf rustling in the wind, every little flicker of light from a blade of grass, every little thing that comes out from the environment. We would just be so overwhelmed and overstimulated at all times. So our nervous systems are programmed to be attuned to certain stimuli, that we eventually learn how to cultivate our filter, and basically create more top-down filters over the stuff that's coming from the bottom up. And there's a ratio here. So there's a ratio of, bottom up stimuli and top down information processing of the stimuli. And, that set point kind of varies throughout life. But, early in life, that set point is very much up here, where you're getting a lot of bottom up stimuli, and then your top down filtering is kind of less so. And then over the course of life, that ratio flips. You start to have a lot more bottom up or top down processing and filtering of that information. And then the bottom up raw data gets to be attenuated.
More and more,
yeah. And then as people, flip this ratio and have more like top-down processing and information filtering, this is when people can start spiraling into ruts, and then you get really caught into your own mental loops and all this and that. And then you kind of get really into internal and into your own mind, and then you kind of like create these kinks of how you're kind of processing the raw information of the universe. And I think that psychedelics, they flip this ratio. So instead of, your top-down information flows, being dominant, your bottom-up information flows become dominant. And that basically means that you're more sensitive to the innate information that is coming from the universe. You basically are more in sync with the natural rhythms and the harmonics and the information and the data that's coming from the universe. So for a moment, and this could be, what is involved in like that mystical experience or the ego dissolution experience. It's when, your inner world and then the outer world are in consonance with each other. You're more entrained, you're more attuned to the natural rhythms of the universe, instead of being stuck in this feedback loop of your internal mind. And I think that the natural universe, if you look at just all the patterns that are in nature, all the fractals, the rivers that carve through the land, the lightning strikes that come from the sky, the trees that grasp for the sun, the blood vessels that flow like rivers throughout your body. This fractal archetype is so ubiquitous, but it's chaotic. It's entropic. And I think that this also harkens back to the Douglas Hofstadter quote that I had just mentioned earlier, is that the fractal may look very chaotic and entropic, but there's a hidden order in that chaos. And I think that's the paradox there, is that it's chaos, but there's a hidden order in the chaos. And I think that this is the order that, behooves us to sink more into. It's like it's like a natural order that you only get to by surrendering to the chaos.
I love that. Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I think it's so helpful to have an understanding and a model like what you just shared going into any kind of psychedelic experience. And I was just thinking, as you were sharing, we do have, as we all know, examples of bad trips of people, worst case scenario, ending up in like a psych ward or having a kind of breakdown or having a traumatic experience. That can all happen too as like a shadow side of psychedelics. So it's not, from my perspective, it's not as simple as take these mushrooms and you'll have this mystical experience. It's set up the set and setting, support yourself as much as possible, have positive intentions, have some of this understanding like we're talking about here. And then if you feel called, have a psychedelic experience so that you can appreciate that. Because I just wonder, it's like, it's not so simple, right? Like there's a risk. And if you don't set it up in the right way, that ego dissolution, for example, that going into the chaos could provoke tremendous fear. And when the ego does come back online, it will interpret it in a negative way or get more into the loops or more into the ruts or affirm this negative belief that the world's not safe or that I'm really messed up or that other people are really messed up. And that's part of what trauma is. It's like ingrained negative beliefs. So
yeah. And this is definitely where the importance of set and setting come into place, because a person's mindset, for example, if a person is barely hanging on to a semblance of stability, then dislodging that stability can send a person spiraling into a negative experience, insofar that, I think it was Stanislav Grof who said that psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers of a person's innate mental tensions and energies. And if a person has a lot of unresolved mental tensions, falling into that chaos is going to enable those unresolved mental tensions to take up more bandwidth and rise to the surface. And that's definitely a reason for, a certain level of conscientiousness about what a person is bringing into an experience with them. For some people, looking right into the abyss can be highly healing and therapeutic for other people. Looking right into that abyss can be terrifying, and it can bring up, really challenging experiences in the moment. And I think that this is an active area of discourse in the whole world of psychedelics, is, making sure that there is an understood dynamic that, hey, if something's going to come up, just understand that it's going to come up. And have the right container to be able to manage, this coming to the surface, whether that means having a friend or a guide or somebody there to hold space and to be able to create a feeling of comfort that enables the person to navigate challenging emotions in a safe manner where they don't fall off the edge. But yeah, I'm grateful you brought that up, because that's super important for people to understand that things are going to come up.
Another thing I'm thinking about is the importance of music. And I was listening to Andrew Huberman talk about psychedelic research earlier today, and he was mentioning how music is a key component. I think he mentioned Robin Carhart-Harris talking about that, actually, that it's a central part of the experience for psychedelic therapy. And I think music is helping create that coherence and that grounding and that those patterns that you're talking about. And yeah, it's cool to loop back to music, how important that can be.
The really cool thing about music is whatever you're experiencing, sonically, there are actually very similar activation patterns of the neurons and the ensembles of neurons in your brain. And I just find that so beautiful, binaural beats, when you have two different frequencies going into each ear, and then your brain combines those two frequencies, and then is able to kind of like pull out a new frequency, using constructive and destructive interference. That's so fascinating. It's like as within, so without, or the other way around, as without, so within. It's that your nervous system is literally creating internal signals and oscillations that are congruent to the vibrations that are coming from the music. So whenever there are harmonics in the music, your own nervous system and body are actually reproducing those same harmonics. And I just find that so fascinating.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, in terms of the neuroscience of psychedelics, we know it's mainly psilocybin, LSD, DMT, mainly acting on the serotonin system. And people who've been taking SSRIs need to either taper off or, talk with their doctor. But that SSRIs can block the psychedelic effects. Do you have anything to share with us about the neuroscience with that?
Yeah, that's actually one of the challenges when it comes to using psychedelics, especially with people who are seeking relief from depression and don't want to be using pharmaceuticals. Typically, SSRIs can blunt the effects of psychedelics. And this is actually a moral dilemma that I think is actually best suited to be dealt with individually. I don't think there's actually a broad generalization that can be made about this. If a person is on SSRIs, this is something that they actually should have a really direct conversation with their provider, with their own doctor. And I'm hoping in this day and age, in 2026, doctors, mainstream doctors especially, they ought to have an open-minded attitude towards psychedelics. I think every doctor in the country should be ready for their patients to come up to them and start inquiring about whether or not psychedelics might be appropriate for them in their situation. And I think that if a person is on SSRIs and is wanting a psychedelic experience, I think every doctor should be ready to know how to look at a person's medical record and make an educated assessment if this person is capable, or if it's advisable for them to taper off the SSRIs for them to have a psychedelic experience. Because at the end of the day, if a person tapers off SSRIs, too hastily, there is discontinuation syndrome where people can get really, really like into, negative emotional space. And I think that there have been really prolific reports of people not doing that the correct way and kind of making their situation worse. So I think it's an irresponsible thing for anybody to speak to a wide audience on a platform and kind of make a general statement that like, hey, you should take psychedelics and then quit your antidepressants. I think that's a very reckless thing to say because you never know. You don't know what a person's disposition is, and if the particular SSRI, there's so many different SSRIs, and then SNRIs, too. So there's such a variety, and you can't generalize. And I think that every doctor should know what they're doing, and they should be ready for this question.
Yeah, and I think people should be told about the side effects more. I think a lot of people get on psychiatric medications at a young age, and they're not cognizant of all the side effects. And
there comes a point where there is such a insidious medical industrial complex where a lot of times there are so many ways to help a person who's experiencing depression, and all these more holistic solutions are bypassed in favor of the quick and easy solution of let's just put them on pharmaceuticals. I think our medical model, our medical system in the United States has this penchant to go straight towards pharmaceuticals, while I feel like a lot of the things that are causing depression are not necessarily solely due to biological disposition like low serotonin. I think there are such broader societal factors that come into play. Like earlier we were talking about the loneliness epidemic. I think that when people feel isolated, they feel siloed, they feel socially rejected, and they get caught in this negative spiral of rumination and social isolation. And then that social isolation reduces the pool of social stimuli they're able to pull from to inform their self-model, and then they isolate themselves or feel less confident to be themselves in social contexts, which then reinforces the rumination and the spiral. And you see how this like runaway feedback loop works. And we don't have parks on every corner. We don't have streets where kids can go out and play and constantly find new people to become friends with and have community to really lean on. And there are so many societal factors that if a person were able to fall out of the negative rut that they're in, have healthier food habits, healthier sleep habits, healthier social habits, and there's so many other things that should be first frontline things to attempt to address before going straight into pharmaceuticals. And this is not me trying to completely dismiss the utility and the role of pharmaceuticals. And sometimes the things that I've been talking about changing in a person's life, it's unfortunate that sometimes for a person to be able to implement these changes, it does call for privilege. And, a lot of people do not have the socioeconomic status to be able to make all these changes so readily.
That's such big topics, but ideally we can be creating a society where the vast majority of people, if not everyone, has more access to nutrition, good information, health, wellness, not needing to overwork or all the things that can go into creating a happy life. Like that should be the norm. That should be the baseline. For
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times if a person has the right disposition for psychedelics, in many cases, these can be the catalyst, like as I had mentioned, granted that a person is not in the disposition where a psychedelic experience might cause them to spiral into a more challenging disposition. Granted that a person, has some semblance of a window of the right setting where psychedelics are primed to have a positive effect. In many cases, they can be the catalyst for people to
it's a great word.
Get out there and change their nutrition, change their social habits, change their lifestyle habits and all that, which is why I'm a big advocate for decriminalization. I think that the American medical model has gotten to be so focused on the authority of the doctor. One of my friends had a remarkable quote that has stuck with me. She said that to Americans and to many Westerners, the doctor is the shaman. In previous civilizations and more some civilizations still do it, but a lot of us, think of this, and especially some developed countries, this is something that has been kind of left in the past. But I think if we are to bring something like that back, there are ways for people to have faith in a person in their community who can help guide them through challenging experiences or psychedelic experiences, or just altered states of consciousness where they're able to come out on the other side and feel better. And that was the shaman. But for a lot of Americans, or one more thing before I'll get to the modern stage, like this shamanistic paradigm, people trusted this person, and you gave this person, you had faith in this person, and because you trusted this person, you're able to come out on the other side feeling better. Now, on the other hand, this societal role of that person in the community that you trust your health to, your mental health, your spiritual health, has been filled basically exclusively by the doctor. And a lot of Americans feel like that, hey, if I'm going to have an experience that involves my health, whether that's my mental health or physical health, they feel like the doctor is the ultimate authority.
Yeah.
And that means that there's a huge segment of the society that only feels compelled to undergo a psychedelic experience if they have medical guidance.
Right.
And I want to navigate this carefully, because I don't want to dismiss, the role of the medical apparatus in having people have psychedelic experiences. But I also don't want to nourish or emphasize this notion that the medical apparatus should have exclusive control over people's ability to experience the psychedelic experience.
Like we should have more freedom of choice and access to information to make choices with. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in our day and age, there's been so much more opening up of access to psychedelics and interest in psychedelics. And there have been several ways of approaching psychedelic policy reform. One of those ways that's championed especially by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelics and Science, has been to really advocate for this regulated therapeutic model, where it's basically saying that, psychedelics, these are medicine, so why not work with the FDA and work through the regulatory process and get psychedelics channeled through those modes of access, and voila, and then we can create access to psychedelics through those channels. And on the one hand, I think that there is a lot of value in going down that path, insofar that so many people in this country will only trust the medical institutions and will only feel safe having a psychedelic experience under that umbrella. On the other hand, I think there are so many alternative modalities of experiencing the altered states of consciousness that are invoked by psychedelics that go beyond the medical model. So many people are able to have these experiences on their own in nature, and not necessarily have any sort of like infrastructure, like institutional infrastructure underneath it. And I think that those people ought to have freedom to have access. And I think that communities can be very powerfully self-organizing. And I think that if we allow communities to create their own containers, they have the intelligence to create containers that are not beholden to this very hyper risk-averse, sterile, and regimented medical framework. Nobody.
Absolutely. Yeah. So risk-averse. Yeah. And sterile, and some people want that, and some people will get a lot of benefit from other approaches, like you're sharing. Well, I'm aware of the time, so we're gonna have to wrap up soon. But for people listening, like, how would you define the decriminalization movement? What are the goals there? What successes? What failures? Like, where's it trying to go?
Yeah. So basically, decriminalization is really simple. It just removes criminal penalties for people using or possessing psychedelic substances. It's really as simple as it gets. And if you remove criminal penalties, then that enables a person to choose on their own accord how they want to relate to these substances. If they want to trip outside in nature, they can do that. If they want to have a dance party with a bunch of friends on mushrooms, they can do that. If they want to have a friend watch over them while they trip in their backyard, they can do that. You know, you name it, the sky's the limit. As long as you're not doing anything unethical, such as you know, dosing people without their consent, or doing things that basically anybody would clearly understand as unethical, then you can do it.
And it's still illegal under that framework to sell them, right? But you can give them, like with mushrooms, for example, you could grow mushrooms legally in Colorado now. You could give them to a friend, but you're not supposed to set up a shop on the corner selling mushroom chocolates to tourists.
Sure. I think the way decriminalization has been implemented in most places, commercialization is not included. So decriminalization just basically says you can grow it, you can gather it, you can gift it, you can possess it, you can use it, you can basically do everything but sell it, because selling will all of a sudden open a can of worms involving licensure and regulation of the facilities and inspections, and there's a whole thing that gets involved. I mean, even in a state like Colorado, you have to get a special license to like sell things that you can in your own house. You know what I mean?
Right.
So when you start talking about these mind-altering substances and then like the regulatory oversight that governments love to have on things that you're selling that other people are going to consume, it opens a can of worms. So to keep the law really simple, grow, gather, gift, don't sell. And it lets people choose how to relate to the substance on their own accord. And one of the things that I like to really mention in this context is that I think that as a society, we need to prioritize decriminalization over legalization, because as I was mentioning, I don't think it's bad for there to be a regulated therapeutic model for people to access these substances if they don't ever want to just take mushrooms they bought from somebody or they were gifted from somebody who grew in their own closet. And they want this really like well-regulated stuff that they know it's been tested, it's really pure, it's done in a controlled setting, then they should have that opportunity to do that. But my biggest fear is that if we give too much priority to the regulated framework while not giving enough attention to the decriminalization or prioritizing decriminalization, then I think that there are forces in our society and in our political and capitalist milieu that might try to undermine freedom and access to psychedelics outside of this regulated framework. For example, the medical industrial complex really does not want competition. You know, like they really just want to maximize their bottom line. They want to maximize profits. So if a regulated framework is created, then there's all of a sudden a lot of financial stakeholders that are created. The investors in the corporations that procure the medicine, and the corporations that procure the experiences, and the facilitators, and all the. It's a big complex. It's a big industrial complex that gets created from this, and a lot of financial stakeholders, and they have a financial incentive of funneling all of the demand into their model. And an incentive to box out and prohibit competition. So they see that the people who are using psychedelics underground and outside of the regulated access framework, that's competition. That undermines their bottom line. And they have an incentive to box it out. So they hire lobbyists, and they say things like, oh, we have all of these like rigid protocols for safety and purity and all this and that, and all these other people outside on the underground, they're doing things so sketchy. They're having way more freakouts. They're using bunk tampered with substance, and you know, they're presenting it with a semblance of care and concern. But the ulterior motive is they're actually just trying to stomp out competition and funnel all the demand into them. And they send their lobbyists to the lawmakers, and then they create all these harsh guidelines and try and prohibit the underground and prohibit decriminalization. That's why I think the syntax is important. I think that there should be both a regulated access, and then there should be both the decriminalized access for people to choose how to relate. These lanes should exist side by side in parallel, but if the regulated access framework comes first, then we risk having them take all these steps to prohibit decriminalization. But if the decriminalization comes first, and then you bring the regulated framework, the decriminalization creates that foundation that the other institutions can climb upon without precluding the other. So that's my spiel.
Yes. No, I like that. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Yeah, it's so clear and logical. It makes total sense. And we basically all know this now, right? I mean, there's nothing you're saying that would be that it'd be hard to disagree. In Colorado, we had decriminalized nature. It's amazing that it succeeded. And thank God it was on the ballot and people voted for it and it passed. And my understanding, decriminalized nature, it's decriminalizing natural psychedelic substance like psilocybin mushrooms and certain forms of DMT. And I think Ibogaine, maybe you can speak to that, but it's not decriminalizing LSD or MDMA or other substances that would be lab made. Is that correct?
That's true. So the Natural Medicine Health Act, which was Prop 122, which Colorado voters did pass, it includes 5 natural psychedelic substances. So 2 of them are psilocybin and psilocin. Oh, okay. So basically those you can lump together. And the other 3 are DMT, mescaline, not including peyote, and ibogaine.
Got it. Right.
And basically the law has 2 lanes, kind of similarly to what I was just mentioning. The 2 lanes are the decrim lane and then the regulated access lane. And Colorado did a fun thing where they lumped them both together. So just a second ago, I was kind of really emphasizing that, like, hey, let's do decrim first and then regulate. But the way Colorado did it was they just lumped them both together, which is, adequate. As long as you have a solid decriminalization, then the regulated access framework, they can handle its own stuff. I have a lot of friends who are actively seeking to get licenses to be a licensed facilitator here in Colorado. And these experiences have to be done at licensed healing centers. Yep. And there's a whole bureaucracy.
I'm in that process right now, actually.
Yeah. So you're probably navigating the bureaucracy.
Yeah. Yep.
We've yet to see, it's too soon to really make a lot of sweeping statements about the efficaciousness of the regulated framework, and it's going through some growing pains right now. But as an activist, I'm just really delighted and content with the fact that a solid decrim component was included. Because if a person is trying to have a psychedelic experience in a licensed healing center and then things get too challenging or too expensive or too bureaucratic, then they can just get mushrooms on their own and have their own experience on their own. Right. So that carve out is still there. And I'm happy about that. But my biggest quibble with how Colorado is playing out with the regulated access framework is the bureaucratic side of it has kind of bureaucracy has done what bureaucracy does. And there's a lot of red tape.
Yes.
And
they see the downsides of that. The main big downside I see, to just make it simple, is all the bureaucracy and red tape. It makes it so much more expensive and cost prohibitive. So all of a sudden, being a licensed psilocybin therapist, thousands of dollars to become a client of the one who goes through all those bells and whistles and hoops costs a lot more. So
yeah, that's what we wanted to avoid as activists. But
so quick question. When I look at the Colorado decriminalization law, Prop 122, super glad it passed. I think it's really well thought out. I read it. It's I'm impressed. I'm proud to be in Colorado. I'm happy that's there. When it was on the ballot and it was leading up to the day, election day, and we're going to vote on it, there were some activists that messaged me saying, don't vote for that. And they turned against it. Do you want to share that? Like, what was going on? I never quite understood that.
Yeah. So to be frank, to go into that whole drama, we would have to dedicate a whole other podcast. Okay. It's a very long story. I'm really happy to get into it. I'd actually really love if we could schedule
maybe round 2.
Yeah, round 2 to really get into the politics of it.
Because that was confusing for me because I wasn't in the weeds as much as some people, and I was just like,
yeah. But I'll just really quickly try to summarize it for the sake of time and maybe give a trailer for maybe a second podcast that we can do. How much time do we have left, by the way?
Maybe just like a few minutes here.
A few minutes. Okay. So basically, oh man, it's such a thorny topic that I don't even know where to start. But where I'll take it is we had to fight tooth and nail to make sure that the decrim lane of Prop 122 was solid. The original language had limits to possession. And that's something that I thought was a complete deal breaker. And not only a deal breaker, if they had limits to possession, I would have actively, fought immensely against. I would have been the person texting you saying vote no.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because limits to possession is how law enforcement creeps into the equation. And it's not decriminalization. It's still prohibition. There are no limits to possession of how many tomato plants you can have. There's no limits to possession of how much tobacco you can have. There's not even limits to possession of how much alcohol you can have.
Okay.
You can get pulled over with a semi-truck loaded to the brim with vodka,
sure, yeah,
and beer and wine, and then the cop will look at it and say, "Have a fun party."
Right.
And as long as you're not drunk.
As long as you're not drinking while you drive.
Right.
Yeah.
And then alcohol is so harmful to individuals and society. But we collectively decided as a society that we're not going to continue prohibition. So, no limits to possession on alcohol. And then for the law to come in and have limits to possession on how many mushrooms you can possess, that's not an answer. That's still prohibition. And if having only like possessing 27 grams is lawful and 28 grams you're a criminal. No. So limits to possession is how, and not even just law enforcement, it's how the medical industrial complex, they create scarcity. Because if a person is only able to possess a certain amount, that creates a ceiling of how much demand can be supplied by the grassroots economy. But anyway, the original language contained limits to possession. I personally fought tooth and nail to remove the limits to possession. And thankfully, New Approach PAC, the authors of the legislation, heeded the feedback and they removed the limits to possession.
Amazing. That's awesome.
Now, the big quibble why a lot of activists really turned against Prop 122, one factor is just the whole process with how New Approach PAC came into Colorado as an outside institution with big money funding and kind of bypassed and steamrolled over the local grassroots activists.
Okay.
They did a bunch of polling and found out that Colorado polled as one of the highest likelihoods of the people voting to pass a psychedelic measure. So they basically took their polling data, came to Colorado, decided they were going to run a ballot measure, and basically put minimal effort into reaching out to the grassroots community. To their credit, they did put some effort, but a lot of us felt that it wasn't enough effort. They weren't centering local voices. They were kind of coming into Colorado and said, "We're doing this. Here's your channel to offer some feedback, but we're going to roll with what we're going to roll with." So a lot of people just in principle, because this wasn't a grassroots effort. It was an outside organization, New Approach PAC, who came in and sponsored the legislation. That in principle turned off a lot of people. Now, the other thing, so the people, the activists who were able to, put their differences aside and roll through, a lot of them were turned off because the final language for how the regulated framework was going to roll out basically said that there was going to be 16 people appointed by the governor who are going to come up with all the rules of implementation.
I remember that, yeah.
Right. So the ballot language actually did not spell out how the framework was going to unfold. It kind of just gave a skeleton of guidelines and said that everything else was going to get figured out by an advisory board of 16 people that were going to be appointed by the governor. Now, can we trust blindly that the governor of Colorado is going to appoint 16 people that are going to have the right interests in mind? Because who are the people that are in most proximal, who are in greatest proximity to lawmakers like the governor? These are industry people, like law enforcement, medical industrial complex people, lawyers, just cannabis industry people, just industry. These are how people like lawmakers, like governors and legislators get elected, by forming connections with industry and lobbyists and all that. So immediately off the bat, there's a sense of suspicion that we can't trust that the governor is going to appoint 16 people who are going to have the right interests in mind. And that's probably one of the biggest factors is 16 person advisory board. We don't know what's going to happen. We can't trust it. Vote no. But personally, I felt that my relationship to psychedelics would probably never be confined to the regulated access model. I would probably never need an experience to be held in the regulated framework. because I feel very confident doing psychedelics in nature. That's my ideal location, is to be out in the woods, maybe along a creek, or maybe at my home. And to have psychedelics in a setting where I'm in control, and where I can be surrounded by friends and not held in a sterile setting with a trained practitioner. And I know that my disposition is not how a lot of people are, and I know that a lot of people do have value, find value in having a psychedelic experience in a more controlled setting. But because the decrim component was solid, I ultimately felt that the passage of Prop 122 was a victory. And then the bureaucratic side, it's going to have to do what it does. And it's going to have to figure its stuff out. Because I do hope that the grandmother or the soccer mom, who would never take psychedelics on their own, and who are probably some of the people who need the healing the most, mainstream American society, they probably need the healing the most, and they deserve to have a psychedelic experience. And if that means they need a regulated setting, then I hope that we can create the right context and the right containers for them in a responsible and intelligent way.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really interesting. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah. What a joy. Thanks for having me.